Covering all of Delmarva, this is WBOC News at 7, Delmarva's news leader.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Cassie Semyon. Welcome to WBOC News at 7. Governor Larry Hogan announced today that the state of Maryland has officially surpassed a major milestone when it comes to COVID vaccinations. Governor Hogan says Maryland has distributed more than 7.5 million COVID vaccines. Nearly 81% of Marylanders 18 and older have received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine. Almost 95% of Marylanders 65 and older have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine as well. The state is continuing to focus on vaccine accessibility through the No Arm Left Behind initiative and the Go Vax mobile summer tour. Hogan has also pushed to make booster shots available immediately for vulnerable populations and to advance full FDA approval of all COVID vaccines. Moving to Delaware tonight, 75% of Delawareans 18 and older have received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine. Right now, Kent County has the lowest rate with only 49.8% of Delawareans getting their first shot, followed by Newcastle with 59.2% and Sussex County with 61.2% of its residents partially vaccinated. The Division of Public Health reports the state has administered over 1 million vaccines in total. Schools in the first state are set to receive nearly $700 million in federal taxpayer money as part of the government's COVID response efforts. Since March 2020, the government has provided close to $200 billion in pandemic aid to schools. That's more than 4 times what the U.S. Education Department spends on K-12 schools in a typical year. Statewide districts and charter schools have been allocated more than $570 million, which averages to about $14 million for each district or charter. And to break that down further, that's over $4,000 per student. As of last week, less than $75 million of those funds have been allocated to Delaware and been spent. A judge has struck down Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' ban on mask mandates in state schools Friday. The judge deciding that DeSantis lacked the constitutional authority for a blanket mandatory ban. This comes as Florida's weekly COVID report saw more than 150,000 new infections this week, the most of any 7-day period since the pandemic began. CNN's Paulo Sandoval has the latest.
With the U.S. still falling well short of the 70% vaccination rate experts say is needed to achieve herd immunity, troubling new information about the Delta variant. A study out of the UK finds that the now dominant Delta strain is not only more contagious, but also more dangerous, doubling the risk of hospitalization compared to the once common Alpha variant. That's bad news for many Americans, only 52% of whom are fully vaccinated against COVID, and the White House is urging people to get the shot.
If you're an American who is not yet vaccinated, or if you're an employer who is yet to adopt vaccination requirements, we have a very simple message. Get off the sidelines, step up, and do your part.
But as the government pushes Americans to do more to stay safe, the debate over masks rages on. The New York State Department of Health will now require students, faculty, and staff at all public and private schools in the state to wear masks while inside school buildings. And judges in Texas and Florida are pushing back against bans on mask mandates that were implemented by Republican governors in those states, ruling that school districts are allowed to require students to mask up. In Alabama, where counties are mixed on mask mandates, at least 5,500 school-aged children tested positive for COVID during the week ending on August 21st. Cases and deaths are on the rise in that state, with double-digit deaths reported every day for the past 3 weeks. Alabama state health officer says the situation is dire and people need to take this seriously.
We are really in a crisis situation. We've said that over and over for several weeks. We need people to understand that you yourself, if you're hearing these words, you're the person who can make a difference. You need to be responsible for your behavior. You need to do what it takes to not continue this situation.
Meanwhile, the mystery over what started COVID in the first place remains unsolved. A 90-day investigation by the U.S. intelligence community concluded that the virus could have come from a laboratory leak or jumped from animal to human naturally.
One person has been killed and another injured after a deadly boat accident off the coast of Ocean City yesterday afternoon. The Ocean City Fire Department says they received a report of a serious trauma about 60 miles offshore Friday. One person suffered a minor head injury. The other was pronounced dead at the scene. According to the U.S. Coast Guard, their helicopter was dispatched, but 2 Good Samaritans and the Natural Resources Police got on the scene first. The crash happened during a fishing tournament and is still under investigation by the U.S. Coast Guard. The remains of 13 U.S. service members killed in the terror attack outside the Kabul airport are being transported back to the United States. More than 170 other people were killed in the suicide bombing on Thursday. President Biden vowed revenge, and now we're learning more about the operation targeting ISIS-K. John Lawrence reports.
The U.S. military carrying out a targeted drone strike in retaliation for a deadly suicide bombing claimed by ISIS-K Thursday in Kabul.
2 high-profile ISIS targets were killed and 1 was wounded. And we know of 0 civilian casualties.
A U.S. defense official tells CNN they believe at least one of the targets had links to potential future attacks on the airport. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby says the targets were hit in a single strike and they were all ISIS-K planners and facilitators.
Threats are still very real. They're very dynamic, and we are monitoring them literally in real time.
Afghan journalists who visited the site of the drone strike near Jalalabad say it killed a man, woman, and a child and injured several other people. The U.S. military retaliating just days ahead of the deadline to withdraw from the country.
We may be leaving Afghanistan, but we aren't quitting it. And I think if you listen closely to the president, he is explaining what the post-August 31st presence of the United States is. It is clearly going to be covert operations.
This comes as the U.S. military and coalition forces race to get American citizens and vulnerable Afghans out of the country before August 31st.
I don't care what happens, with the Taliban after the withdrawal. I don't care what the conversations the U.S. government has with them, and I don't care what they ask. There will be lethal strikes after September 1st. Bet on it, because we got to take out ISIS-K. It's going to happen.
I'm John Lawrence reporting.
The Pentagon said that any U.S. passport holder can get to the airport in Kabul after a U.S. embassy in Kabul alerted yesterday that U.S. citizens at the airport gates should leave immediately due to security threats and avoid traveling to the airport. It's been a hot and rainy day for parts of Delmarva today as we take a live look into Rehoboth Beach. Actually, that's our Herchick Automotive camera. Meteorologist Delencia Jenkins will let us know how long this rain will last. Delencia.
Well, this day turned out to be a beautiful day. We have a spotty shower or 2 popping up across the shore. As we're looking at clouds and radar, you can see majority of the storms from this morning, they're off to sea. Now, here's your next 12 hours. We're going to see partly cloudy skies as we move throughout the day. Temperatures will be making its way down to the low 70s as we progress through the day. Tomorrow, though, we can expect sunny skies with temperatures in the mid 80s. I'll have more details in just a few minutes.
All right, thank you, Delencia. Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards says if you're going to ride out the storm, you better be at that place by tonight. For many in New Orleans, Ida developed so fast they didn't have a plan to get out. CBS's Omar Villafranca has this story.
Cars stacked up, bumper to bumper on Interstate 10. People looking to get out ahead of Ida's arrival. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell says she could not order a mandatory evacuation for most of the city because of how quickly the storm developed.
This is hurricane prep in Louisiana.
Those who stayed behind found long lines of people scrambling for generators, fans, and propane.
All we got left for a few exchanges. 1, 2, 3, 4 to go. 550 gallons in 4 hours this morning. It didn't last.
Many stores already struggling to keep up with demand during pandemic-fueled supply shortages.
Shopping during COVID is always hard, but it's a little bit harder now.
Health officials are concerned about COVID spreading in shelters. Less than half of all Louisiana residents are vaccinated, and cases hit an all-time high here less than 2 weeks ago.
Please make sure you are making plans to stay healthy and safe. And the way you do that is by masking when you are not with people when you are with people that you don't normally live with.
In coastal St. Bernard's Parish, the race was on to get boats out of the water.
Nobody was out there shrimping today in open day shrimp season, so that ought to tell you. And when I got in this morning or late last night at 4 o'clock, about 75–80% of the boats already left.
And for those staying behind, Mayor Cantrell had one final message.
Shelter in place. Hunker down. It is vitally important.
President Biden has already approved a federal emergency disaster declaration for the state of Louisiana. It's also worth noting that FEMA plans to send about 150 medical personnel and dozens of ambulances to the Gulf Coast area just in case they are needed, because keep in mind, many of the hospitals are still strained by COVID. Omar Villafranca, CBS News, New Orleans.
Still to come on the news at 7, one man has made a second home out of his local blood bank, and for good reasons. How he's saving the life of people he never met and for over 50 years. WBOC News at 7. We'll be right back.